Hey guys, how's it going? So this is something I've been wanting to do for a little while. Basically, book recommendation videos, but also include books that I wouldn't recommend, all centered around a specific topic. So I love recommendation videos, and especially when it's like topic specific, because then I know like if I'm looking for that type of thing, I know that I'd like the other books. But the problem is that sometimes I can book, and I don't know if no one's talking about it because it's a bad book or because it's a bad representation, or if it's just because not many other people have read it. So that is why I wanted to also include some of the not so great ones. This one is going to be the first video in the series. I'm only going to be doing 3 books for this one, and that is going to be books about OCD. Now, I have OCD. I'll make a video talking about it one day. I'm not quite there yet, but yeah, OCD is really different depending on the person. Like, there's obviously common themes and some things that kind of affect most people, but there's so many different types of OCD and so many different ways that it affects you, just like most mental illnesses. So I'm only one person with OCD. I can only speak on my experiences and also like from what I've heard from other people. So take that with a grain of salt. But I have 3 books here that I have read all about OCD, and I'm basically going to be telling you whether they were good representations, bad representations, and why, essentially. I'm not going to be going into any spoilers about any of these books, but yeah, that's what this is going to be. So let's just get into the books. So let's just start with the most obvious one to get out of the way first. Turtles All the Way Down by Gren. This is a very well-known book. It's a very well-liked book. I enjoyed it. I still don't know if the main character's name is pronounced Aza or Aza, but she has OCD, and it's, I'd say, fairly well done. Also, if you didn't know, Gren himself has OCD, so this is an own voices book, which I like. I found her OCD is very, like, anxiety-based, which, I mean, OCD is an anxiety disorder, so like that makes sense. But I found it was, I don't know, it was more on the anxiety side than on the OCD side, if that makes sense. That's why I think this book is really good, because so many people have anxiety and so many people have gone through bouts of anxiety that people understand anxiety a little bit more than OCD. So I think that having it written in this way is really helpful for other people to kind of be able to, you know, relate and understand, because it's so heavily rooted in something that is already a little bit more understood. The book in general, the plot is basically not important at all. It's just an excuse for the characters to have something to do while they go about their lives. So if you're the kind of person that really focuses on plots, I would not necessarily recommend this book. I didn't mind it, but, you know, again, the plot literally doesn't matter. I thought that it was a pretty well done book. The writing style very much is like, you feel her spirals, which I think were really well done. Like, I've heard many people describe this book as what it feels like to be in a panic attack, and I can definitely agree with that. So this book is really, really great, but if you are in a anxious place already, I would recommend holding off a little bit before reading this book, because it could be that little bit to push you over the edge if you're already on, you know, like, not on the best foot. So it was good, but keep that in mind. But overall, I think this was pretty good representation. Next, we're going to go with The Pleasure of My Company by Steve Martin. Steve Martin is an actor who has written a couple novellas. This book is about a man named Daniel who, he has OCD. It's never specifically said in the text that he has OCD. He refers to himself as neurotic and with certain compulsions, but it doesn't straight out say OCD. But in other like marketing materials for the book, it does specify OCD. And I honestly think it was a very bad representation of OCD. I did do a little bit of research, and I haven't found anything that says that Steve Martin has OCD. And he hasn't said anything to imply that I know of. I could be wrong, but I do not believe that this is own voices, and honestly, it should have had a sensitivity reader. It was not well done. So first of all, about the plot of the book, nothing really. There's the main character, Daniel, and it's just basically about him kind of just going about his life, and just, it's kind of like a slice of life contemporary. It's all over the place, it's kind of wild, but not necessarily in a fun way. He is not a likable main character, and like I can get behind a non-likable main character, but he's actually like, I don't want to say hateable, but I didn't like him. I felt almost uncomfortable reading him sometimes. Just to give an example, he is obsessed with this woman who is a real estate agent. She's never met him before, he's never spoken to her before, he just watches her outside his window because she is usually showing apartments at the place across the road from him. So it's kind of creepy stalkerish. The main character never learns that this is inappropriate, and some of the things he says is just like icky. Like, he goes running one day and he talks about how like he's gonna run past her, and how because he looks so like manly and attractive, you know, she's gonna instantly swoon, and it's just like, it's very inappropriate. It's basically written in a way that it's like, oh well, he's crazy so he doesn't know any better, so it's okay. It's not. First of all, he refers to himself as insane quite a few times. It's a personal pet peeve of mine because I think that words like insane and crazy, used in that context, I don't think people outside of those respective communities should be using those words in that way, if that makes sense. It's like if you have some sort of like psychotic or psychosis, some sort of mental illness like that, and you choose to use those words and that's empowering to you, you have every right to use those words. But I think that calling somebody with a mental illness crazy, while you yourself don't have that, I just personally don't like it. That's another rant for another day. But because this author does not have any of those mental illnesses, I don't think it was quite appropriate for him to use that language. And the way that it's used in this book is, oh, well, it's okay, I'm crazy. And specifically with this, OCD is not a psychotic disorder. It is an anxiety disorder. And there is some confusion around there because some of the things that OCD makes you do and makes you think is incredibly illogical, and it makes you have these thoughts that seem quote unquote crazy. OCD is so widely misunderstood that I think it's extra important to make sure that what you say is accurate, because there's like so much misinformation around there. So I really think that it should be a priority when speaking about something that's so like widely misunderstood. I think it's important that you put extra effort into being clear and not being misleading. And I think this is very misleading. Like, it makes him sound like he has some sort of insanity, and I just very much disagreed with that. It was like, I don't know, they just like casually mention histories of abuse, and it doesn't factor into the story at all. It's completely irrelevant. It almost seems like it's just like, oh, here's his excuse for being this way. And it's not. You could have a mental illness regardless of your background. Like, obviously, yes, trauma and mental illness do go hand in hand. Like, you're more likely to have a mental illness, certain types of mental illness, because of certain traumatic experiences, certain events in your past. Like, I'm not saying that's not the case, but you don't need a reason to have something wrong with you. Like, I don't know. I found that really, really poorly done. I found he uses mental illness as an excuse to be inappropriate and be genuinely very creepy. Also, he is a compulsive liar, not even in a way that makes sense. Like, he'll just be sitting on the couch and she'll say like, oh, what were you doing? He's like, oh, I was reading a book. Well, there are no books in the apartment. Or like, there was this little statue sitting on the coffee table, and she's like, oh, did you make that out of clay? Even though he obviously didn't. And he says yes, but like, you can see like, it still has the price tag on it. Like, it's just little things that don't make sense, and it's almost written in a way that it's like, oh, well, because he's crazy, he's allowed to do all this stuff. And that's not okay, and that's harmful. Also, if you can hear dogs barking, my neighbor's dog's outside playing. I don't know if you can hear that or not. Oh, also, there's trigger warnings for talks of suicide in this, which don't make any sense in the context that they're presented in. Like, it's just very out of left field and I don't understand it. The romances in this book are very uncomfortable. I really don't like them at all. This main character is very uncomfortable. I don't like him at all. Like, I don't want to rant too much, but I really think it's important to understand why this book is so potentially problematic and why I would not recommend it. I will say it was an enjoyable read in a weird sort of way, but it's not a good book and it's not a good representation. So there's that. Also, it has one of my least favorite things for most books about mental illness, but there's talk of his recovery at the end, and it's very far from accurate, to say the least. Like, I think that books about mental illness shouldn't end with and magically they were better. Specifically with things like OCD. Like, OCD does not go away. There is not a cure for OCD. Like, there really isn't even medication for OCD. There's just, like, coping mechanisms and anti-anxiety medications to help you deal with it better. But, like, there isn't a cure. You're not going to get better. You can just deal with it better and have it affect you less. So, to imply that you can just, like, you know, oh, well, I met the love of my life and now I'm okay, is something that I just have a problem with. And that's just my opinion. If you disagree, that's completely fine. But overall, this book just has so many elements that I would find very harmful. If you do choose to read this book, just keep in mind that this is not an accurate representation of OCD, and this is very far from the truth, and yeah. To end this on a good note, though, I'm going to talk about Kissing Doorknobs by Terry Spencer Hesser. I think that's how it's pronounced. This book was one of the first books with OCD that I read, and I read it before I knew I had OCD. I have not reread it in many years. I don't think I'm quite ready to reread it. It's a really short book. Like, it is, let's see, about 150 pages. I believe this author has OCD. I do like that there is an afterword, I don't know if you can see it here, an afterword by A.J. Allen, MD and PhD. There's actually a little section in the back about OCD, and there's like resources, and like, I think that's just a really nice touch. For books with mental illness, I do like when they have just that extra little bit of credibility to them, if that makes sense. This book is basically about a young girl and how she kind of develops her OCD and how it affects her life. I think she meets a friend and he's like a germaphobe OCD, I think. As a story, I really enjoyed this. It was, like I said, a really short book, a really quick read. I flew through it. There are some mentions of self-harm and suicide in this book, so keep that in mind. If you want to know what my personal OCD is like, read this book. This book, when I was reading it, I didn't know I had OCD. Like, I just thought that I was weird, had quirks, like, which I think a lot of people can relate to. This book came out in 1998, so I probably read it a couple years after. So I was probably about 10 years old when I read this book. So I didn't quite have the knowledge, first of all, about myself or about OCD to fully grasp all of this and maybe pick up on the clues that I might have if I would have been a little bit older. The thing that I loved and related to most about this book is that she didn't seem crazy. Like, the things she was doing didn't make any sense, but she was like explaining them to herself, and her explanations made sense for her, and as somebody who did the same thing, I could understand what she was saying even though I knew it made no sense. Like, that's the thing with OCD. It doesn't make sense. It's completely weird and illogical, and we know that, but it doesn't matter. The way that my therapist was explaining it to me is, for a lot of people with OCD, it's like our brains are just stickier, and sometimes we're just having a really like sticky day, and someone will say something or you'll see something and it gets stuck in your head, and then that will grow and morph into an obsession or compulsion. In this story, the main character, Tara, she hears the rhyme, step on a crack and you break your mother's back, or whatever it is. And she's having this sticky brain day and it gets stuck, and then she is terrified of stepping on cracks because it'll, you know, if she does that, her mother will die. And there's so many little things, like some of them just come out of nowhere and she just has this new obsession or compulsion. And some of them have like logic behind them, and it's what I would call OCD logic. Like, it doesn't make sense, it's not logical, but your brain has convinced you that this makes sense and these are the rules that you have to follow by. I just found this book so relatable. It's such a cute book. It's, I think, just a really great representation of OCD, And I might be a little bit biased because, like I said, this is exactly how my OCD is. Like, this book is the hands down most relatable for me. And I really want to reread it, but I know that I'm not ready yet, but I'm really excited for when I am ready to reread this book. Again, I think that this could be triggering if you're not in a healthy space. Also, this has a lot of like very bad reactions to OCD. Like, her family is mostly mad at her because they don't understand why she's doing these weird things and why she won't just stop. At one point, anytime somebody swears, she has to start praying because she doesn't want them to, you know, like, offend God and then they're going to go to hell, and so she is, you know, she has to pray. And she does some, like, one of her compulsions, I think, and then her dad gets really mad and says, like, God damn it, Tara, why are you doing that? So then she starts praying, and then he gets angry, and it shows her family being really negative about it because they were aware that something is wrong, and they can't understand that she can't just stop. If you have people in your lives that are very negative towards your OCD, or you have any sort of trauma because of people's reactions to your OCD, just keep that in mind. Make sure you're in a good place when you read this book. I love this book. I think it is such a well done representation. It's such a great book to read. So yeah, definitely some trigger warnings, I would say, but I recommend looking into this book. If you don't have OCD, I think that this book would be a really great, I think, way to understand it. If you do have OCD, just be mindful of the potential triggers and make sure you're in a good headspace, and don't be afraid to step away if you need to. Alright, so those were the 3 books on my shelf about OCD. I really hope that this was somewhat helpful or interesting. If you do have OCD and you've read any of these books, feel free to let me know what your thoughts on them, if you agreed or disagreed with me. If you're not comfortable leaving that as a public comment down below, then you can always DM me on Twitter if you still want to talk. My username is @tibuggy. So if you want to chat but you don't quite want to like talk about your mental illness in such a public place, that's cool too. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please click the like button to let me know, because I really want to do more like recommendations / like wouldn't recommend videos like this in the future for specific things. I find them really fun, and it's something that I've always found them interesting. I've always really enjoyed them, so I really hope that you guys like this so I can keep doing these videos. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of my videos. I post every Wednesday and Saturday, usually reading or writing related. But I hope to see you guys next time, and until then, have a great day. Bye!